Hello everyone, welcome to Cinema Mancuso, and this is Notes on the News. I'm Peter Mancuso, and this is the show where I break down the biggest stories in film, media, entertainment, and give you my thoughts. If you join us live, super happy to have you. If at any point during the show you have any questions or comments about any of the topics I'm going to be covering, feel free to drop them in the live chat. I see we already have a message, Mario Fanatic Animations, hi there. Thank you so much, Mario Fanatic Animations, for always showing up, always having interesting things to say, different comments. So if you have any questions or comments, any of you other viewers, drop them in the live chat. I'll do my best to kind of respond to them. It's always more interesting for me when we can kind of get like a conversation started. What else here? Oh, I'm like going off script. I forgot my script here. So if you haven't already, please like this video, like this live stream. It really helps with engagement and the algorithm and people, finding the channel. So if you have found the channel, why not subscribe? We're trying to grow this as best we can. If you're watching this after the fact, still super happy to have you. If by the time you're watching this, there should be time codes in the description so you can kind of jump around at your leisure. We stream this show every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern. So same deal as before. If you haven't already, please like this video and do not forget to subscribe. Okay, let's take a quick look at the box office here from this past week. Total domestic box office, a little over 191 million, so only a 4% drop, so it held pretty well. I'm going to credit that to the Easter weekend, even though it wasn't like a long weekend. Though that's actually not true, so depending on your job, I'm skewed, or my view on this is skewed or biased, because I'm Catholic, and I grew up going to Catholic school from kindergarten all the way to high school to 12th grade. So we always had Good Friday off. But I don't know if that's really a thing. I mean, I didn't have that day off for work now, but my boss also only gives us only the federal holidays off. But maybe people were going to the theater. And clearly that kind of helped maintain this box office lead. And as you can see here, some films actually had a bump, which is really interesting. But let's talk about the biggest new movie here, Sinners. This is the Ryan Coogler, his first original film, right? Because Fruitvale Station is based on a true story. And then Creed is a franchise film, Black Panther, things like that. So critics and audiences seem to really love this, as you can tell from the Rotten Tomatoes tomato meter and popcorn meter. It made about 48 million for the weekend, which exceeded even the higher ends of my projections, which I had put around 30 to 45 million, but I put the target around 37. So this performed fairly well, and worldwide it made about 63.5 million. Now the concern is that it's still not profitable, right? Because it cost like $90 million. But I think there was actually a little social media kerfuffle. I think it may have been like Variety or one of the trades sharing a story about how it made 63 but off of a $90 million budget, so it's not looking great right now. I think it was like Ben Stiller who replied why is this the headline for a original movie opening to $63 million worldwide? Because that's kind of rare these days. You know what I mean? You really only see bigger box office numbers, especially worldwide, when it's attached to some kind of IP, right? So I'm hoping with good word of mouth, which this seems to be getting, that it's going to cross that 90 million threshold next week. But it'll depend on what kind of drop-off it has. But technically speaking, because it is, it's all a numbers game, and it's not just about how much you make, it's in relative to how much money it costs to make that money. So right now, there's still a bit of a way to go. I'm really hoping I can catch this one. I've just been so busy. For those of you who have been with the channel for a while, actually even before I started this YouTube channel, I would write written reviews for new movies coming out, and I did that for about 3 years. But this past winter, I've just gotten so busy that I was like, I'm just going to kind of go on hiatus until I think after the summer season into the fall. So because of that, I'm not really seeing much new stuff as of right now. And that's kind of why I liked doing the reviews, because it forced me to go see stuff I normally wouldn't go see, and a lot of really great hidden gems were brought to my attention, right? I'm really hoping I can maybe catch this one, because it's, seems like a very theatrical experience. People are talking about the IMAX and the 70mm and all that stuff. So I would love to try to catch this. See, that's what they need. They need to get people like me who are like, oh, that seems interesting. They need to get people like me to get off our ass and go see this movie. The only other new thing was Colorful Stage, the movie, A Miku Who Can't Sing, opening at number 9. This is apparently based off of a phone game. I really don't know. I know very little about it. And again, it has a very high popcorn meter score. But I'd argue that that's, again, probably self-selection. Like, the people going to see this are the people who are already interested in this film. Made a little under 3 million, was that 2.8? Worldwide, it's made a little over 10.5 million. I couldn't find any budget numbers on this, so, take this for what you will. But I think I saw it was like 36 billion won. Or no, excuse me, that's The King of Kings, which is still here in its second week. It dropped from second to third place now in its second week. Again, critics are kind of whatever about it, but notably it's not rotten on Rotten Tomatoes. Audiences seem to really love it, but again, there might be a little bit of self-selection there. Actually had a little bit of a jump, which makes sense because this was Easter weekend. So far now domestically, it's made a little under 46 million, and worldwide about 49. So it's really mostly a domestic film. And the budget, again, like I said, I looked it up, and there was conflicting sources, but the source I'm going to go with said 36 billion won, which is the South Korean currency. So when you convert that, it's a little under 20 or a little over 25 million. So this has actually been, it's still not at the 100% return, which is like you want to double the budget to account for marketing and advertising and the theaters taking their cut and things like that. So ideally, we want to see this thing get up to around 50 million. So it'll really depend on if this has a massive drop, considering Easter's now over. Technically, for Catholics, the Easter season has begun, but for normal people, and by normal, I say this as a Catholic, for people who aren't entrenched in this, Easter's over, right? We think of the lead up to the holidays as that holiday season rather than the period after. Same thing with Christmas. Technically, Christmas as a season starts on Christmas. But if that doesn't happen, then this could, become a little gem when it comes to that financial performance, right? A bunch of stuff here in its second week. Again, all like right. They were in a block last week, and they're basically in the same block now. They just all moved down one spot because Sinners opened at number 2. The Amateur dropped from 3rd to 4th. Again, critics aren't super fond of it, but audiences seem to really like it, and I would say this is not necessarily self-selection, considering, it's not like this built-in, The King of Kings obviously is not an IP film, but it's the IP of Jesus, right? There's like a built-in audience for that. It made about a little over 12 million for the week, which is only a 17% drop. So, while a bigger drop than the week as a whole, it, shows that, there's some strength to these films, especially, considering the holiday weekend, right? Worldwide, it's up to a little under 64 million off of a $60 million budget. So it's crossed that initial threshold, but, we're going to want to see it get a little bit more than that. I'm not quite sure what's going to happen here with this film, just because, we're going to have a lot more stuff opening up in the next couple of weeks. And again, it feels like a cable movie. But again, audiences seem to like it okay. I just don't know if people returning to The Amateur? I don't know. This might be an issue of it's not holding because audiences really like it and they're getting repeat viewers, but rather people who just didn't, like, it just spread out. Like people who, some people went the first weekend, some people went the second weekend, and maybe now like the rest of that contingency is going to go the third weekend, right? By contrast to The King of Kings and The Amateur, a film that critics are really liking in addition to audiences, is Warfare. Brought in 8.8 million for the week, which was actually a 6% bump, right? So, like The King of Kings, it got a little bit of a boost there. Not as much as King of Kings, but that makes sense, right? Most of this is domestic, right? So if you see domestically, it's paid 17.1, and this is worldwide 17.5. Off of a $20 million budget. So it's still technically in a negative zone here. But the what do we have here? The legs, though, are quite good already just for a second week. It's already over 2, which again, if you're new to the channel, the legs is basically a formula where you take the biggest weekend, domestic weekend for a film and divide it, you take the total domestic box office for a film and divide it by the biggest domestic weekend for that film. Typically that's the first weekend, but in some cases it might be a different weekend for various weekends. So like, for example, The King of Kings has really good legs. Has, I think, like the best legs that we're seeing here in the top 10 right now. And that's because that biggest weekend is technically this weekend, right? But Warfare doing well. It's just, it's because of that budget number, it still has a long way to go. But maybe it will do well in the ancillary markets. Who's to say? Drop is also still here doing well. Again, critics and audiences don't love it as much as some of these other films, but still very much in a strong place. And by contrast to the Warfare, this is nearly doubled its budget. We're almost there, right? It only cost $11 million, and it's made over $20 million worldwide. So I would say one more week, right? Because if it's at $6 million for this past week, unless it has like a catastrophic 80% drop, I think it can make $2 million in the next week. So this is very much on the way to being a cheap, but and this is why so many cheap horror or thriller films, there's a reason why they keep getting made, is because they're able to. There's a ceiling, to be sure, a very high, a very low ceiling, but also a very low floor. Right, there's only so much you can make, but there's only so much you can lose, right? There's only, there's almost like a built-in guaranteed minimum box office amount if you play your cards right and you market it right. So, smaller films have a lot more versatility to find a niche and then perform really well, right? Another note here, Death of a Unicorn, which had dropped out of the top 10. Last week it was in 18th place. It jumped back up into 8th place. And this, I'm not sure why. I tried to look and see if it had added some theaters or something, and I really can't figure it. So if someone in the comments knows why, please let me know. But it had an almost over 500% jump in terms of its box office, right? Again, very small, only about 3.2 million. But compared to where it was last week, whatever, do some algebra, whatever that number was, and then multiply by 506%, you get this 3.2 million number. Though critics didn't really like this film, and audiences liked it fine enough. And I think because of this little boost, it finally crossed that initial threshold of making back the budget. But I'm skeptical. I feel like this was a weird fluke. Again, I'm not sure why, but I'm going to be very surprised if this is still in the top 10 next week. And then the only other thing I really want to mention here is Snow White. Had a fairly, I guess not a big drop. It was only at 8th place last week, so now it's down to 10th. So it's right on the cusp now. But it's in its fifth week, right? So this is the oldest movie we have here in the top 10. Again, critics massacred this movie. Audiences were very lukewarm about it. And, it's not that it hasn't made money. It's made almost $200 million. If you look here at that total worldwide column, it's just like I was saying before, it costs so much. It costs nearly $270 million. It's the quality isn't good enough to get people really coming or even coming again to the theater. But also, I feel like it was a misfire because Snow White is not really a strong brand. It was a concerted move. If you notice, there's no direct-to-video sequels for Snow White. Like every other Disney princess got some other ancillary media. This is really the only time that Snow White has had any kind of follow-up, spin-off, remake, reboot in the Disney mold. I mean, of course, there have been like public domain adaptations of the original Brothers Grimm fairy tales. And I think the reason why they did that was because it was so sacrosanct. It was the first feature film from Disney. It was Disney's, big achievement. Improving animation was not just for dumb, short, comedic cartoons, but can actually be artistic. So I think there was a concerted effort by Disney as a company to like leave it alone. But then the downside to that from a business perspective is that the brand has kind of withered. Like it's you know what I'm saying? That there's not a lot of participation in there's no Snow White fandom. There are people who were very passionate when Rachel Zegler suggested it was, the original story was a little outdated. But I would chalk that up more to just finding a culture war scapegoat or just finding a battle to fight, rather than people being really, really passionate about Snow White specifically. Maybe about Disney in general or about the Disney princess brand in general, but Snow White specifically, I don't think so. So I think it was just a dumb business decision to put $270 million into a film that people aren't going to care about and is not going to be good, right? So looking ahead to the upcoming weekend, we have The Accountant 2. This is the sequel to The Accountant, which I forget when that came out. I think I was in college when that came out. And it's basically about the franchise. I guess now it's a franchise, right? About an autistic accountant who I guess becomes like a John Wick type person. I really don't know much about it, but this sequel now, almost like a decade later, because I think it was like early when I was in college, and I started NYU in like 2015 or something. This is projected to make around 18 to 35 million. I'm gonna put the target around 27, a little bit closer to that upper end. Ben Affleck is a big star. Jon Bernthal is popular as always, but again, Jon Bernthal is more of like a C-list celebrity, but he's such a phenomenal actor. So people who really like him. So, obviously not huge numbers like we saw with something like Minecraft or even now Sinners, but definitely a beefier opening that we've had over the past couple weeks, right? And then we also have the 20th anniversary re-release of Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith. This is exciting. This is the film that made me want to make movies. It was the movie that made me want to make movies. I'm actually going to me and my fiancée Vivian are going to go see it for this release this weekend. But we're going to go see it in 4DX. So I've never seen a movie in 4DX. And then when I saw this was in 4DX, I was kind of like, well, I've never seen a 4DX movie. I've seen this movie a million times. So let's do this to make it kind of fun and interesting. So this is projected to make around 13 to 20 million. I'm going to put it around 17. Again, not a super big opening, but considering it is, it's a big enough projection that it bears being mentioned here, I think speaks to the nostalgia and the fan base for this movie. And then we also have Until Dawn. This is the film adaptation of the Sony PlayStation video game, which essentially was like one of those choose your own adventure visual, playable movie games. So it's kind of weird that they're adapting it because, from my understanding, it wasn't like the story was particularly strong. What kind of made it interesting was the variability of your playthrough. This is projected to make around 6 to 12. I'm going to put it around 8. Kind of on the lower end of things. It'll really depend on the quality of the film, but I feel like the thing about Until Dawn, again, I say this as someone who hasn't played it. It's the idea is that it's presented as a very generic Hollywood horror film, cheap horror film. But what makes it interesting is the fact that it's a game, and it's your player agency and choices lead to certain characters living or dying, or surviving, or getting killed, right? But if you just make it a movie and you're choosing one storyline to be the canon storyline, then it's just a cheap Hollywood horror movie, right? So I don't know what the appeal of this is going to be, or if critics are even going to really go for this. And then finally, we also have The Legend of Ochi. This is an A24 fantasy film. They're really trying to expand the kind of genre that they're known for. They want to be in the market of bigger films, like we saw with Civil War last year. Though this movie has not gotten great reception from the film cinephile community, which I feel is what you really need in order to get a film like this to be really successful. So it's a very small opening. This might even be a limited release if I'm being honest, but I'm not sure. I would need to confirm that. But I figured I would at least put this here. It's only projected to make around 1 to 3. I'm just going to put the target right in the middle. Okay, before going on, just want to give a quick plug to another YouTube channel I recently started called Replay Rewind. 1,000 video games across 50 years of gaming history. Can I play them all before I die? Well, we're going to find out. It's my attempt to play all these games, most of them for the first time, recording my playthrough, and then afterwards doing kind of like a history review and breakdown of each game. We've gotten up to Galaxian, which so far is my favorite game. I've kind of had a little bit of a hiatus on that just because I've been so freaking busy with stuff, so I'm hoping to kind of get started back up with that this weekend. So definitely go check that out. It would really mean the world to me. I'm trying to grow that channel as well as this channel, so you can find the link to that in the description down below. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. And forewarning, this entire stream, because there wasn't a lot of news because of Easter. So basically what I'm going to do, this is going to be probably a shorter broadcast, it's, knock on wood, but basically I'm just going to be covering all of the news, or as much of the news, at least the pieces that I found interesting, from Star Wars Celebration, which of course is like I don't think it's annual, isn't it like semi-annual? It's like every other year. Star Wars Celebration, the Star Wars convention where it's kind of like Comic-Con, but just for Star Wars, where they'll announce different stuff for the movies or games or TV shows or things like that. So each segment is going to be a different kind of area of announcements, and then kind of wrapping up with where I think the franchise should be going. So I'm actually going to grab another drink, and we'll get started here. Okay. Let's talk about story number 1. So at Star Wars Celebration, Shawn Levy's Star Wars film has officially been revealed, among some other film projects that we already knew about, but we're getting updates on. So Shawn Levy's film, I've covered this film on the channel, or at least the announcements of this, even though we really knew nothing about it. And we still don't really know anything, but what we do know is that it's going to star Ryan Gosling, which we already kind of know. And that it's titled Star Wars Starfighter. There's seemingly no connection to the 2001 game of the same name. And I got a quote here from Shawn Levy saying, quote, "This is a standalone. It's not a prequel, not a sequel. It's a new adventure. It's set in a period that we haven't seen explored yet," end quote. And it's going to be set 5 years after the episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. So, while kind of disappointing that it's still, they can't do any project without it being like 4 years after episode whatever, right? At least that is interesting because it's like the farthest forward in the timeline. So, while still very much in the shadow of pre-existing films, it has the open road in front of it, right? It's going to be written by Jonathan Tropper, who also wrote a bunch of Levy's other films, like The Adam Project and This Is Where I Leave You. I guess Tropper is also the creator of the Apple TV Plus series, Your Friends and Neighbors, with, what was that, John Hamm. And like I said, it's going to be starring Ryan Gosling, who said at the event, quote, "The reality is that this script is just so good. It is such a great story with great and original characters. It's filled with so much heart and adventure, and there just really is not a more perfect filmmaker for this particular story than Shawn," end quote. The most diplomatic PR statement I've ever heard in my life. The reality is that the script is just so good, right? Like, maybe they're just trying to dance around spoilers, but that is probably part of it. But also, I think the primary thing is just he's getting paid a shit ton of money. It really doesn't matter if the script is. It could be just so bad, but it doesn't really matter, right? Production. Because the concern with a lot of these Star Wars films or projects is that they never get made, right? So they get canceled or they're just in development hell. There's a bunch that have been announced that we've never even gotten official cancellation for. This does not seem to be the case here, that this is happening. They're going to start shooting. The cameras are going to be rolling this fall, in about 6 months. So it seems like this is actually happening. And it's going to be released, pretty quick turnaround. It's going to be released in near the end of May 2027. So that's going to be interesting because it's going to be the 40th anniversary of Star Wars, which of course was released in 1977. As well as just a few weeks after sister company Marvel releases Avengers Secret Wars, which is which will be the second of the 2-part Avenger movies, right? So pretty ballsy on them to be where we are releasing 2 giant ass movies 3 weeks apart from each other, however far apart they are. So that'll be interesting to see. We also got some updates on the Mandalorian and Grogu film. Of course, this is a spin-off of the Disney Plus series, The Mandalorian. And it's interesting because The Mandalorian was one of the only original programs that launched with Disney Plus day one. So it's weird now to see The Mandalorian, the property that, was like the center of many think pieces in the entertainment trades of, maybe this is the future of Star Wars, just TV. So it's interesting now to see the project that spurred all of that conversation and discussion is now just getting a film in theaters, right? It's also going to be including Sigourney Weaver in like a mystery role of some kind. We've already known about this project, but as I've said before about this, it just feels really pandering and lame. Like not only the fact that they're making this movie, because the show, I stopped watching the show after season 2. From my understanding, the show has really just gone off the rails, in terms of like focus and quality. So like the fact they're even making this film feels pandering and lame, but the fact it's literally named The Mandalorian and Grogu, like it feels like a working title. And then they were just like, you know what? Focus testing says it's good. That's a really great title because it literally has the two things in the title that we want people to come to the movie for, because they like The Mandalorian and they like Grogu, aka Baby Yoda. And this is going to be releasing a year prior to Sean Levy's film in May 2026, which again, if I'm not mistaken, wait, hold on, Avengers Doomsday might also be coming out, in May as well. So 2 years in a row, they're releasing an Avengers film in the beginning of the month, and then a Star Wars film at the end of the month. So I mean, this is exciting that we're getting new films because we haven't had a theatrical film since The Rise of Skywalker. But so I'm excited for getting new Star Wars films in general, but I'm not excited for these films in particular, right? Because ultimately, Sean Levy is like a fairly mediocre director, all things considered. And my hot take is I'm not sure if The Mandalorian was ever great as a show. Even its best season, which was season 1, I thought was fine. And then season 2 was really mediocre. And from my understanding, people have really kind of caught on to that. So, I'm like not particularly excited, but I'm always open to being wrong. Because I never want to go into a movie hoping it's bad. Like I want to go into every movie hoping it's the greatest movie ever made, right? So I try to check myself, but it's just that a lot of times I'm proven right. Okay, before going forward, I want to give another quick plug to the podcast I do with my fiance Viviana called Now That's What I Call a Franchise, where we pick a film franchise and we go through every single installment. The good, the bad, and the ugly. This season, upcoming season, I think we're starting like in a couple, like not this Friday, but next Friday. We're going to be doing The Muppets, which is a lot of fun. So we've started that process. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also just find us on YouTube if that's your preferred way to podcast. And you can also just find us at the link in the description down below. Also, before going on, I see a comment here from Mario Fanatic. Do you remember that Sony Pictures signed a deal with Disney Plus and Netflix back in 2021 to have Spider-Man on Disney Plus? Sorry to be off topic on this, but just wanted to let that remind you. And the week before, Beyond the Spider-Verse. Yeah, so not to dodge your question, I'm not even going to touch on the whole Disney, Netflix, Sony deal, just because it's like so many moving parts, and frankly, I'm not well versed enough to speak on it. Like the particularities of that, though. Again, this thing about like a week before Spider-Man, it's gonna be a very busy summer box office season, and that's like right at the beginning too. So it's almost like, what else is gonna be, Because, I mean, we're kind of getting that this year with Fantastic Four and Superman, but those are from two different studios. Whereas Avengers and Star Wars are both very much from Disney, and then while Spider-Man is Sony, it is Disney adjacent. Even if the Spider-Verse movies have no Disney involvement whatsoever, it just feels like a lot. So yeah, to kind of... So thank you for bringing that up, because I think that's just preposterous that Disney is doing that. I think they're really going all in on franchises and blockbusters, which is weird to say because they've been doing that forever, but take that for what you will. Okay, let's talk about story number 2, or the second part now, right? So in terms of shows announced at Star Wars Celebration in Tokyo, Some shows are new announcements, some are just like follow-up seasons, right? The big one I feel like is a new animated series for Disney Plus called Maul, as in Darth Maul, Shadow Lord, right? So it's gonna be, kind of part of like that Dave Filoni animated universe of stories. And it's going to really be focused on Darth Maul, quote, plotting to rebuild his criminal syndicate on a planet untouched by the Empire, end quote. Because, that's been a big part of, like, the Disney Star Wars canon is Darth Maul, following the Clone Wars, kind of became, like, a crime lord. And we kind of got glimmers of that in Solo, a Star Wars story, the Han Solo spinoff, as well as in Rebels, and a little bit of the Disney Clone Wars final season. Sam Witwer is going to be returning to voice the character who's voiced him since Darth Maul was brought back from the dead, so to speak, right? For Clone Wars back in the George Lucas era. And Witwer had to say, quote, we learned some different things about this character. He's got some different traits that you wouldn't necessarily think he has that make perfect sense from what he's been through, end quote. Like, this seems really cool, but like, it'd be cool if they really treated it like a real crime drama, and he's like a very irredeemable character, almost like a Michael Corleone, where I feel like they're just going to try to do like what they did with the Book of Boba Fett, which I admittedly have not seen. But from my understanding, they tried to make him the hero because he's the main character, and they want people to buy the toys, and they can't have the main character be like a morally ambiguous crime lord, right? So, again, the Sam Witwer's comment, I'm sure there's going to be some interesting insights into Maul, but it's going to beg the question of, like, what is it really worth the millions of dollars you're spending to make it? I also have a quote here from Lucasfilm Vice President of Animation Athena Portillo, saying, quote, unfortunately, I can't tell you too much. Then why are you saying anything? But what I can say is Sam Witwer's involvement in the show has been pristine. The quote keeps going, but I just want to pause here. Again, such PR. What do you mean pristine? Who has ever described someone's creative involvement as pristine? Like, it just feels like a ChatGPT response to, like, it's just like it's like Mad Libs. Just like, well, what kind of word can we put in that isn't the one we use all the time? But anyway, let me continue. I'm very excited about him being able to review the scripts and provide input in all of that as well. Dave Filoni and Sam created the character for animation, and so it's very important to hear his thoughts as well for the character depth, end quote. And this is going to be releasing in 2026, though I don't think we know exactly when in that time of year. We also got more insights on Ahsoka, the second season. Most notably, Hayden Christensen, who I believe I did not watch. As you're knowing, I've not watched a lot of the more recent Star Wars stuff. I should do my homework. Hayden Christensen briefly appeared, I believe, in the in the first season, primarily as like a flashback or a vision. Whereas now I think he's kind of coming back as Anakin Skywalker, like his ghost, perhaps. Christensen said, he was at the event, of course, and he said, quote, it was a dream to get to do. The way they conceived how to do it was brilliant in getting to explore the worlds between worlds. I thought it was all really exciting, end quote. So maybe this is more of a reference. Isn't the world between worlds the thing at the end of Star Wars Rebels? Right? Yeah. So like the weird kind of, interstellar 4D space where you can like enter different points in history and things like that. So are they suggesting that like pre-turn to the dark side Anakin is gonna get to like come back in some form? I don't know. We also got more context here that the actor Rory McCann is stepping in to play the evil Jedi Baylan Skoll. This is because the actor who was previously playing him, Ray Stevenson, unfortunately passed away, I think like right before the first season aired. So, again, I really don't know what this is really just like Mad Libs to me. Like I have no idea who Baylan Skoll is. Though the character I do know is Admiral Akbar, who is going to be making an appearance in this. And Dave Filoni said, quote, he's going head to head with Thrawn, end quote. Of course, referring to Admiral Thrawn, right? Another quote from Dave Filoni, quote, it took all my effort to resist writing the line, it's a trap, because I'm like, I can't do that. That would be so lame, because this guy can't always get into traps. You'd think he would see it this time, end quote. So that's kind of funny. So it kind of feels a little pandering, the fact, like, why is Admiral Akbar of all characters showing up? The most interesting announcement, though, is The Ninth Jedi. So this is an anime series. It's spinning off from one of the episodes of the series Star Wars Visions, which is a Disney Plus show. Essentially, it's an anthology series where each episode is just like a different story with random different characters and oftentimes very, like, wildly different art styles. The little description for that episode of Star Wars Visions is, quote, "The daughter of a lightsaber smith is pursued by dark forces while on a dangerous mission," end quote. And from my understanding, it's one of the more acclaimed episodes of the anthology series. And speaking of the series, Star Wars Visions, it was confirmed that it's a third season, volume 3, has been confirmed for October of this year, of 2025. So some interesting announcements, but again, I'm a little hesitant, as I am with all of this, like, modern Star Wars stuff, just because the Disney Star Wars era, they've really struggled with television. Because most of the shows that they've done, save for Andor, but that's the exception that proves the rule. A lot of their shows just feel like bloated features. And not only are they just like features, like, even if they weren't bloated and they were just like feature length runtime, they would still be mediocre, right? So they really just have lost the art of, like, good episodic storytelling. Again, like, they all just feel like feature films, and that's because some of them were feature films in development, and then they decided to, something like Obi-Wan was supposed to be a film, and then they were like, films aren't really doing well right now because of Solo. Disney people seem to love The Mandalorian. Let's turn it into a limited series. But the best show, I think, is going to be the one that really focuses on compelling characters and compelling ideas, right? Because that's what makes any show or any movie or any story good, right? And, Andor, I think, gives you that fix. I think Andor is coming out soon. The reviews have literally, like, every review I've seen, the headline for is, like, the best thing in Star Wars since The Empire Strikes Back or something, right? So, and that's because it focuses on compelling characters and compelling ideas, right? So, I'm not super excited about any of this except for maybe the anime show, just because it's so different. And because it's different, maybe they'll kind of feel like they can play around in the sandbox a little bit more, if that makes sense. I got some comments here from JJ because, saying that's kind of a problem over a lot of TV right now, unfortunately. Cough, White Lotus, cough. So true, right? And I think it's indicative of the streaming era. Disney's not unique in this. It's just that Disney, I don't even want to say it's the most egregious, because I'm not, like, watching a lot of new TV. Like, I'm very late to the party on a lot of stuff. But it just feels really, because it's in a franchise that's predominantly based around movies, you notice it more, I think. Whereas something like White Lotus, there's no White Lotus movie that you're comparing the pacing of, or prior, because the thing is, like, Clone Wars is not perfect, but that show has a very firm grasp of episodic storytelling. And I would argue that even, like, the reboot's the wrong word, but the final season of Clone Wars, like, where they went back, a lot of that struggles with episodic storytelling. Like, they really just feel like, because Clone Wars always operated in arcs, but I would argue that even the episodes within the arc still felt like more or less complete stories. Not that they were independent, but rather, like, they had little mini arcs that were being resolved. Whereas a lot of that final season, even the best parts of it, like that last 4-part, finale, which essentially is just a movie, it's kind of just structured like a movie. It doesn't really feel like individual episodes. But maybe that's just my hot take. So I think Star Wars specifically, it's more noticeable because we have examples of well-made films as well as well-made television series. Let me grab a quick drink. As you can see, I fucked up the photo, so my little box is askew. Oh, this is so frustrating. Okay, let's talk about story number 3. So in terms of games at Star Wars Celebration this year, we got an announcement on Star Wars Zero Company, which is going to be a turn-based single-player strategy game from EA. You don't hear a lot of big budget turn-based single-player strategy games anymore. Again, like I said, published by EA, Electronic Arts. Everyone's favorite villain, and rightfully so. It's going to be developed by developers Bit Reactor as well as Respawn, the latter of which, of course, Star Wars fans know because they're the ones who have developed the Jedi games, like Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor. Like the Dark Souls Uncharted clones, essentially. And a press release about the game says, quote, in Star Wars Zero Company, players will step into the shoes of Hawks, a former Republic officer, to command an elite squad of cunning operatives through a gritty and authentic story set in the twilight of the Clone Wars. As an unconventional outfit of professionals for hire hailing from across the galaxy, Zero Company must set aside their differences to overcome nearly impossible odds and take on an emerging threat that will consume the galaxy if left unchecked, end quote. It's supposedly kind of XCOM inspired. If you don't know what XCOM is, it's another single player turn-based strategy game. Very, very acclaimed. I think it was like a really popular in the 90s, and then they made like a rebooted, reimagined version, I think like in the 2010s, right? I got a quote here from the Lucasfilm Games general manager and vice president Douglas Riley saying, quote, at Lucasfilm Games, we're huge tactics fans, and we have wanted to make a game like this for a long time. The best tactics games are all about meaningful choices, and we're confident we have chosen the right squad in Bit Reactor to deliver a compelling and innovative title that is authentic to Star Wars, end quote. And furthermore, a press release for the game says, quote, players will embark on a campaign of tactical operations and investigations across the galaxy. Between missions, they will develop a base of operations and gather intelligence through a network of informants to stay one step ahead of Zero Company's adversaries. Players will have the freedom to create and customize their own squad of recruited operators while getting to know a cast of newly authored Star Wars characters, end quote. So like that said, so it's going to be set during the Clone Wars, and you take on the role of this character, Hawks, who's going to be a fully customizable character, which is really cool. And then your squad can be a mix of either a mix of both custom and again original character, but original meaning they're not original, like you didn't make them, but they're original to this game. That they are authored. What did that press release say? Newly authored Star Wars characters. And you know, the thing is, like I said, like I joked before, you know, strategy games aren't super popular, and a lot of times it's because they're just not accessible. That they're very, opaque and have a lot of rules, and the mechanics aren't always intuitive. But it seems like this game is meant to be cinematic and accessible. But then there's things that players can opt into to make it more challenging and interesting, like optional permadeath, as well as limited save options, right? I have another quote here from Bit Reactor CEO and creative director Greg Forch, perhaps? I'm sorry, Greg. Saying, quote, our vision for Star Wars Zero Company is grounded in gameplay design pillars that weave in the immersive Star Wars galaxy with engaging turn-based tactics gameplay. It's our aim to deliver a game with an original Star Wars story from the Clone Wars era that has meaningful outcomes from player choices and deep turn-based tactical combat with an approachable and cinematic presentation, end quote. This seems pretty exciting, right? Like, I'm always a fan of, just gaming in general that gives players meaningful choices. And especially within a Star Wars context. I mean, that's why people love Knights of the Old Republic so much, right? And, obviously because of my generation, the Clone Wars era, the prequel era is like my preferred Star Wars era in terms of just the aesthetics and the politics of the story at the time. So this seems really cool, and I think people will really get attached to their custom characters, and I think this could be a lot of fun. And this is we don't have to wait too much long. This is releasing next year for PS5, Xbox Series X and S, as well as the PC. There's also they also announced at Star Wars Celebration a major Fortnite tie-in that is going to include Darth Jar Jar. So if you don't know what Darth Jar Jar is all about, it started as like I don't even want to call it fanfic. Like Variety calls him a fan fiction favorite, but I don't even know if fan fiction is the right word. It almost was like a meme of almost like a running joke, like, oh, Jar Jar was secretly a Sith Lord and he orchestrated all the events of the Phantom Menace in order to, begin the process leading to the Republic's downfall. So this feels really scraping the bottom of the barrel. I mean, it's funny. It's going to introduce the gameplay mechanic of Force Lightning, which is cool, I guess. And players will also be able to pilot iconic ships from Star Wars, like X-Wings and TIE Fighters and things like that. It's going to be a 5-part season. All you kids in the comments, let me know. You know, back in my day, you bought a game and it was just a game. Now it's like you buy it, or I guess Fortnite's technically free, right? But it's in seasons, right? So they'll have like different game modes or objectives or events that happen in the game. I'm really not that old. I'm just like I don't know. I'm just so disconnected from it. But it's gonna be a 5-part season titled Galactic Battle. And it's and here are the names and the dates of these different parts releasing. So Imperial Takeover on May 2nd. So not that long from now, actually. The Pull of the Force, May 8th. Mandalorian Rising, May 22nd. Star Destroyer Bombardment on May 29th. And then at the end, Death Star Sabotage on June 7th. And of course, something like this makes a lot of sense since, you know, one of the earliest stories I did on this channel, I think it was like February of last year, in 2024, Disney was making a major push into gaming, specifically with Epic Games, who you know, is the creator and maintainer of Fortnite, right? Disney had invested $1.5 billion with a B, $1.5 billion into Epic Games earlier last year. So it only makes sense that we're now finally seeing the fruits of the fruits of that, right? So, you know, again, really cool. I think Star Wars Zero Company has a lot of potential to be really, really interesting, both as a Star Wars fan, but also just like from a gameplay perspective. Just the only thing though is that we just, and again, I'm saying this as someone who's older, and perhaps I'm a little more biased, and I'll kind of explain where I'm coming from, and you're gonna hear me say what I'm gonna say, and you'll be like, oh yeah, he's just biased, right? But it just feels like since Disney bought Lucasfilm and Star Wars, there hasn't really been any like iconic Star Wars games, and you know, where they're not just like beloved by Star Wars fans, but they're considered some of like the best games of their generation or their genre or sometimes ever, right? Like, you know, something like Knights of the Old Republic, or even like something like the original Battlefront games, like Battlefront 2. The popularity and acclaim of those games, or acclaim, because I don't know if Battlefront was like super well liked by critics, but kids like myself loved it. But KOTOR, people say is like one of the best games ever made. You know, that feels like a far cry from the current output. And this isn't to say the current output isn't good. Again, I haven't played the Respawn Jedi games, but from my understanding, they're really good. Like, really, really good, depending on who you ask. But I don't think anyone would really call them iconic in the same way, right? Jacob in the comments here says, Darth Jar Jar is high-key, though, a good theory, end quote. Yeah, I mean, I'm really agnostic about both that theory as well as like certain fan theories where it's like, okay, but clearly the text isn't giving that at all. Like, just because something like because there's something in the text that doesn't contradict the theory, that doesn't make the theory good. You know, like, just because I'm sure, you know, you or someone else could be like, well, actually in this scene Jar Jar does this, which if you know he's a Sith Lord, makes complete sense. And it's like, yeah, but he could also just be an idiot, right? Like, so I mean, but I'm not even like hating on it, because it's mostly people talk about this Darth Jar Jar just like in good fun. It's like the same thing I feel like with like the Pixar theory, where it's like they're all in the same universe. Like, it really doesn't change my understanding of the films or the characters or their stories. So it's kind of like meaningless to me. So I don't really like hate on it. I'm like, that's not a true theory. I'm just like, it really means nothing to me. Okay, before going on, I just want to give another quick plug to another YouTube channel I have called Peter Squared, where I cover topics related to film, media, entertainment, in a more structured video essay format. The video I have up right now is called A Closer Look at Frozen, where, you guessed it, I take a closer look at the Disney film Frozen, taking a look at what went right, what went wrong, and everything in between, using these cartoon versions of myself. It was a lot of fun to make. Hopefully it's a lot of fun to watch. Go find it, watch it, comment, let me know why you disagree with everything I said. You can find the link to that in the description down below. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. let's talk about story number 4. So also at Star Wars Celebration, we got a little bit of insight on some theme park changes. Or I don't think it's permanent changes, I would imagine. At least, I think it's just like for a tie-in for the Mandalorian Grogu film. There's going to be a Mandalorian and Grogu reskin or update, whatever you want to call it, for the Star Wars ride Millennium Falcon: Smuggler's Run. Of course, this is the ride where it's almost like a video game where you have like 6 people, right? And the people in the front are piloting, and then people in the middle are shooting at people, and then people in the back get stuck with being the engineer, like fixing, when you're getting hit and stuff, right? So it's almost more like a video game in a way. This was already previously announced. We already knew that this was happening. And here's like a little breakdown of the, I guess, like the premise, the in-universe premise of this story. Quote, in this new story arc, Hondo Ohnaka, who is like the pirate that you're working for, you're doing the smuggling for. Hondo Ohnaka, who's from the Clone Wars actually, catches wind of a deal on Tatooine between ex-Imperial officers and pirates, setting the stage for a high-stakes chase across the galaxy. Guests will team up with Mando and Grogu to track them down and claim a bounty in a dynamic, galaxy-spanning adventure. End quote. And I guess like the big major change, besides just like changing the video that you're watching or playing in, is a new mechanic where the engineers will now, in addition to like healing's the wrong word, like repairing the ship, you'll now also have an additional task of taking care of Grogu. I got a quote here from Walt Disney Imagineering's Asa Kalama, or Kalama, right? Saying, quote, throughout the mission, we're going to be giving the engineers the opportunity to actually get to communicate with Grogu. So we think it's going to be a ton of fun. There may be times when Mando has to deboard the Razor Crest and Grogu, left to his own devices, might get a little happy on the control panel. So we love the idea of there being fun little vignettes and moments where you're sort of on the comm with Grogu, end quote. So again, interesting, adds a different layer to things, but again, it kind of is what it is. Like, it's really not a favorite ride of mine, just because as a game, it's not very interesting, and as a ride, it's not very interesting. The most interesting element of it is the fact that you're in, like, the Millennium Falcon cockpit, and they have, like, this big dome screen, so it as much as it can feel like you're really there, you feel like you're there, right? At least the perspective of it. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this, completely off topic, but my fiance Viviana texted me and said I have to bring this up. When she and I went to Disney World about a year and a half ago, we were on it, and this little girl, who was not like from a Latin country, which is what made it funny. She was like this little white girl. She was the pilot, and she sucked. She was so bad. She kept hitting every single thing, and every time she would go, ay, 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 and then, boom. But also, like, if you're in it, like, you're bumping around and stuff, so it was like we were getting tossed around. She's going, ay, ay, ay. So that was hilarious. But again, I guess there's going to be almost like a choose-your-own-adventure storyline element to it. Kalama says that there'll be a sort of, a quote, critical moment in your adventure where you are strapped for time and have to make a lightning-quick decision about which of our particular bounties we want to pursue. And that's going to be the sort of inciting incident that allows us to decide which are the different destinations we go to, end quote. It'd be funny if these rides had, like, really complex, difficult decisions, like, which of your children do you save out of a burning house or something? Like a high-stakes decision. Like, what is that? Like, come on. Like, let's just stop beating around the bush here. It's going to feature new planets like Coruscant, Tatooine, Bespin, which, if you don't know, Bespin is Cloud City, and Endor, which made me go, when I was reading that, going like, huh, what planets do you go to now in the original version of the ride? I think they're just, like, random places, or even if they're not random, like, they weren't really distinctive, so I don't really remember. And Star Wars rides are really cool in general. Sometimes, of course, Star Tours is a classic. Rise of the Resistance is probably, like, Disney's one of their best rides ever, or at least, like, a complete culmination of so many different elements of, like, Imagineering and Disney theme park ride design. But all of these, especially the fact that this is not just a reskin, but it's a reskin specifically to tie into a movie that's coming out, it reflects just a larger issue with the Disney theme parks over, like, the last, 15 years or so, of just being so slavish to intellectual property and franchises, where, I heard someone, I forget who said it, I think it was like a tweet, so I can't quote them directly, but they basically said, back in the day, Disney rides were high concept, low tech, and now they're high tech, low concept. Like they're not super creative anymore. So I really could take this or leave it. Again, of the 3 Disney rides at Hollywood Studios in Florida, at Walt Disney World, if I could only choose 2 of them, this one would not even make the cut. Okay, let me just grab a quick drink here before we kind of do one last little section. Okay. That's about story number 5, I guess. But it's not even really a story. So we have all of these announcements from Star Wars Celebration. We have the films with Sean Levy's new film. We have a Darth Maul crime show and an anime show. We got a new Clone Wars strategy game. We have a reskin of a kind of mediocre ride, right? So I guess the question that we should be asking after every Star Wars Celebration, after we finish celebrating, of course, is where should the franchise go from here? And I think there's 2 paths that they can take, and because they can really take many paths, including just doing more of the same. But I think there are 2 paths that they could take that would result in some really interesting work. The first path, and they're already kind of somewhat doing this, or they have done this in the past to varying degrees, is they should really lean in and focus on completely different both kinds of stories, as well as focusing on stories within different time periods. That's one path. So I kind of made it sound almost like those were 2 different things. Like focusing on new stuff, new kinds of stories, new time periods. Again, I joked about it, in my the section about Sean Levy's film. Like, I'm tired of this. Just a few years after, like Mandalorian, a couple of years after Return of the Jedi, Sean Levy's film, a couple of years after Rise, like, something like Knights of the Old Republic. I believe when BioWare first started to like kind of coordinate with Lucasfilm, they were like, Lucasfilm was like, you have 2 choices. You can make something directly tying into the prequels, like an Attack of the Clones adjacent film, or you can do something completely removed, like thousands of years before any of the films. And they were like, we want to do the latter, right? Because it just gives you way more freedom and flexibility to do different kinds of things. Because you're not like, oh, well, this person's going to lead into... Like, of course, it's all still in the same continuity, so, like, you can't have Alderaan blow up 4,000 years before it blows up in episode 4, right? But besides that, you really have wide berth to do whatever you want, and the sands of time will smooth out any edges by the time, the timeline catches up to, like, the pre-established stuff, right? And I think that really worked in KOTOR to great effect. So I would really recommend them doing that. And it seems like the 9th Jedi, because I don't know when that's supposed to take place in the Star Wars universe. I think it's ancient, like it's pre Phantom Menace or anything like that. So that could be really interesting. But then I have my hot take, which I never thought of until recently. I'm going to do another little quick plug for the podcast I do with my fiance Viviana, called Now That's What I Call Franchise, where we pick a film franchise and we go through every single installment, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And a season or 2 ago, we did Star Wars. So you can find the link to the show in the description below. And at the end of every season, we do a franchise retrospective, where we kind of talk about the franchise as a whole, what works about the franchise, where we want to see it go, what would make it successful. And I arrived at an idea that I never thought of before, and I've never really heard other people suggest it in this way, or suggest it like with actual seriousness. I think the mistake Disney made, but I don't blame them for making this mistake, because it made sense. It makes sense, and I think it made sense at the time. It just hasn't really worked out for them. They made the mistake of deciding, okay, we're going to wipe the canon clean, except for the 6 films that George did, as well as the Clone Wars show, which he was intimately involved with. But everything else is wiped. So then what happens is you piss off people, because now their favorite story is in canon. Their favorite character is in canon. Luckily people like Thrawn have kind of made their way into the canon. But someone like Mara Jade, who for a lot of people was like a really interesting female character in the Star Wars universe, very different than someone like Princess Leia. She has yet to return in any capacity. But even that suggestion that basically it becomes a piecemeal of like, oh well, we'll reintroduce this character into the canon, this, that, right, and it just gets very messy. So I think the only thing they can do, this, I'm not saying this would result in the best stuff ever, but I'm saying it at least creates the possibility for really cool stuff. Whereas with this, their current scenario, they're really, kind of boxed in. I think they should do a complete reboot. I think that they should, out of respect for George Lucas, but also as like just a base ground, because without this, what is Star Wars? Adapt the 6 films and go chronological. Start with episode 1, but improve the dialogue, improve the performances, make the saga feel more cohesive, rather than a trilogy and then a prequel trilogy that is meant to anachronistically explain stuff in the original trilogy. Use the same cast, so you can do parts 1 and 3, wait a decade, and then have the same actor be Obi-Wan in both. Not that really matters, that kind of consistency, but doing this, using that framework, you're not starting from square one, but you're still doing something new. It's a reimagining of the stories, the same way we reimagine Batman, or we reimagine a text that gets adapted into different film versions, and they follow the same basic structure, but they have nuances and changes between them. I think that's the only way Star Wars can survive, because at this point, it's basically just smelling its own farts at this point. You know what I mean? It's just, so again, I'm not sure how you would even do this, and how would you do it for it to be good, but that feels like the only thing you can really do. To really shake things up. And by doing that, essentially as a parallel universe, a completely different continuity, you don't have to worry about pissing people off because you ruined this character. There are new versions of the characters to begin with. So that's where I feel like they should go. That's very radical. And things would have to get really bad for Star Wars, which seems like, how could it get any worse? Like, people's perception of the franchise is so poor. But it would have to get really bad for, I think, Disney, or, God forbid, they sold it to someone else, for someone to even consider doing what I just suggested. So, in that sense, then, I think they just really need to focus on different time periods and different kinds of stories, focusing on different nooks and crannies of the universe. Or, here's a novel idea. Still do stuff with familiar characters and settings and concepts, but just make it fucking good. Like, that's the biggest problem with most of this shit, is that it's just, the quality is just not good. It's not helped that it's very derivative, but something like Andor is theoretically derivative in that it's that original trilogy era. I mean, it's literally a spin-off from Rogue One, so it is by definition derivative, but it's so phenomenal because it's focusing on interesting characters and exploring interesting ideas, and really exploring the moral ambiguity of rebellion and revolution in a very mature way, not just a Saturday morning kind of way. Something that I think can be thoroughly enjoyable even for adults. But again, Andor is the exception that proves the rule. Like, very simple. Just make it good. Just hire good writers and good directors and good actors. But that is not always a given in Hollywood. So, if that's not on the table and my crazy idea is not on the table, then I think they really just need to focus on different time periods of the Star Wars universe, different nooks and crannies of the universe, different kinds of stories, in order for the franchise to sustain itself. But then you also have to ask the question, is it okay if a franchise ends? Like, does it need to go on forever? Because we haven't really had this, because franchises as we've come to understand them didn't really develop to the 20th century. So we don't know. Like, we're about to enter, in a couple of years, we're going to have Star Wars' 40th anniversary. Some of these comic book characters are coming up on a century. when do these end? Are they gonna keep going on with the same continuities and, the same, I don't know, for hundreds of years? I don't think that's sustainable. And I think more likely they'll just die a really slow death, but maybe instead you could just kind of go out on a high note. But of course, Disney didn't buy Lucasfilm and Star Wars for $4.5 billion or whatever it was for them to gracefully end on a high note. They are going to milk this cow until it is so gaunt. Every ounce of fluid has been extracted from this body before they decide, okay, we'll give it a break. All right, so on that note, that wraps up the show. Thank you all so much for watching. We'll just give another quick plug to CinemaQ. So it's not just a YouTube channel. It started as and still is a Substack newsletter where we publish written reviews for new movies coming out, primarily right now from my very good friend and contributor, who's also a contributor of this live chat tonight, JJB Cubs, a.k.a. Jacob Boblet. Definitely go check that out. It really would mean the world to both he and myself. If you would check that out, comment, let us know what you think about our thoughts on different movies. You can find the link to that in the description below. You can also just go to your browser, type in cinemanqso.substack.com. Once again, thank you all so much for watching. If you haven't yet, please like this video. It really, really, really helps. Maybe if I say really more, you'll like it more. It really helps with engagement, the algorithm, and people finding the channel. So if you have found the channel, why not subscribe? I'm trying to grow this as best I can. I put a lot of work into this channel. I was thinking about this today, and I want to grow the channel, not necessarily for my own fame and glory, but just because I really like when we're able to have a conversation in the comments. But if people aren't watching, I can't do that. So it kind of just feels like I'm talking to the void. So I challenge all of you, send my channel. You don't even have to put a context. Just send the link to one person just one person. And if they go, what the fuck is this? Then you can explain. But it would really be great to kind of grow this community. This CinemaQso family. And on that weird note, until next time, peace out.